The dinner table was set for two, the soft glow of the candlelight casting gentle shadows on the tablecloth. Tricia had been unusually quiet throughout the meal, her fork barely touching her plate. I could sense that something was on her mind, but I chose to let her speak first. Finally, after a few uncomfortable moments of silence, she looked up from her plate, her eyes meeting mine with a mixture of apprehension and resolve. "Jay, there's something I need to talk to you about," she said, her voice trembling slightly. I set my fork down and leaned back in my chair. "What's going on? You've been distant all evening." Tricia took a deep breath, clearly gathering her thoughts. "I've been thinking a lot lately, about us, and about my life. There's a coworker, Brian, who's been, well, he's asked me out on a date." My heart sank. I hadn't expected this. "Brian? Your coworker?" I repeated, my voice coming out harsher than I intended. "Yes," Tricia said softly, her eyes now fixed on her lap. "I know it sounds crazy, but I need to know if there's something more out there for me. I'm not saying I want to leave you, but I need to understand if this is something worth pursuing." I felt a surge of anger and confusion. "So you're asking for permission to go on a date with him?" Just like that, Tricia nodded, looking increasingly uncomfortable. "It's not like that, Jay. I need to see if there's something I'm missing. I want to be honest with you about it." I stood up abruptly, pushing my chair back. "And what about us, Tricia? What am I supposed to think about this?" "I'm just trying to figure things out," she said, her voice breaking. "You're figuring things out by going out with another man?" I snapped. "What happened to working on our issues together?" Tricia looked at me with pleading eyes. "I didn't mean for it to come to this. I'm sorry. I didn't know how else to handle it." "Fine," I said, feeling the weight of betrayal heavy on my shoulders. "If you need to do this, then do it. But I'm not staying here. I'll sleep in the guest room tonight and think about where we stand. Maybe it's time we reconsider our marriage." Tricia's face fell. "Jay, please." "No, Tricia. We'll talk about this tomorrow. Right now, I need some space." I walked away from the dining room, my steps echoing through the hallway. I could hear Tricia's soft sobs as I closed the door to the guest room behind me. The bed in the guest room felt cold and alien, a stark contrast to the warmth of our shared space. As I lay there, staring at the ceiling, my mind raced. I couldn't fathom how things had escalated to this point. Tricia's request was more than just a question, it felt like a challenge to everything we had built together. I was left alone with my thoughts, questioning the very foundation of our relationship and wondering if we could ever find our way back from this. The guest room had become a temporary refuge, a place where I sought solace from the turmoil in our marriage. Each night, I lay in that uncomfortable bed, staring at the unfamiliar ceiling and wrestling with my thoughts. Tricia's request had left a deep rift between us, and now we were each navigating our own paths. I awoke the next morning feeling the weight of the previous night's argument. Tricia had left for work early, leaving me alone in the house. I decided to take some time for myself, focusing on work and avoiding any more confrontations. Later that evening, I had a date planned with Angel, a client who had shown more than just professional interest. It wasn't meant to be anything serious, just dinner. But after the emotional roller coaster with Tricia, it was a welcome distraction. At the same time, Tricia's date with Brian had turned out to be a disappointment. She came home with a look of disillusionment that spoke volumes. The date had been awkward, marked by stilted conversation and a lack of connection. As she entered the house, I could hear the faint clinking of her keys against the table. She walked into the living room, where I was trying to focus on work, but I looked up, sensing her frustration. "How did it go?" I asked, attempting to sound casual but failing to hide my curiosity. Tricia threw her purse onto the couch and sank into a chair, her shoulders slumped. "It was a disaster," she admitted, her voice tinged with defeat. "Brian was nice, but it felt forced. I don't think he's what I was hoping for." I didn't know how to respond. I had my own evening to think about. I'm sorry to hear that. I had my own date tonight, with Angel. Trisha's eyes widened. Angel? The client? Yeah, I said, trying to keep my tone neutral. It was fine. We had a good time. Trisha's face fell further. You mean you're moving on already? Just like that? It's not like that, I said quickly. I wasn't trying to make a statement. I just needed to get out and take my mind off things. She looked away, her gaze fixed on a spot on the floor. I guess we're both trying to escape our reality. The silence between us grew heavy. We were both hurting, but it seemed like we were drifting further apart rather than finding any common ground. Trisha went to bed early, leaving me to continue working through my thoughts alone. I reflected on my evening with Angel. It had been enjoyable, a pleasant diversion from the constant anxiety that had consumed me. Yet, despite the attraction and conversation, my thoughts often drifted back to Trisha. Her disappointment, her tears, and the cold distance between us were hard to shake. The following day, I met with a business associate for lunch, and the conversation naturally veered towards my recent personal issues. I shared bits of the situation with him, though I didn't go into details. His response was empathetic but did little to ease my confusion. Well, Jay, he said, stirring his coffee, it sounds like you're both at a crossroads. Sometimes, a little distance can provide perspective. But it also sounds like there's a lot of unresolved tension. His words resonated with me. It was clear that Trisha and I were navigating separate paths, each of us dealing with our own set of issues. The realization stung, but it also offered a sliver of clarity. We needed to address our problems directly, rather than trying to escape them. As I returned home that evening, I saw Trisha sitting quietly in the living room, her eyes fixed on a book but clearly lost in thought. I took a deep breath and approached her. Trisha, I began cautiously, I think we need to talk. She looked up, her expression guarded but weary. About what? About us, I said, sitting down across from her. We're both struggling, and I don't want to keep going in circles. Maybe it's time we face these issues head-on. Trisha nodded slowly, her eyes reflecting a mix of resignation and hope. I agree. Let's talk. And so, in the midst of our separate paths, we found ourselves at a point where we had to confront our reality. It was clear that we needed more than just temporary distractions. We needed to face the heart of our issues if we wanted to move forward. The counseling sessions had become a crucial part of our journey. Trisha and I had decided to seek professional help, hoping it would provide us with the tools to rebuild our marriage. The sessions were often uncomfortable, but they were a necessary step toward understanding each other's perspectives and addressing the underlying issues. Our counselor, Dr. Patel, was patient and insightful, guiding us through the tangled emotions and misunderstandings that had brought us to this point. One particular session stood out, where we were forced to confront the root of our problems more directly. Seated in Dr. Patel's office, Trisha and I faced each other across the coffee table, the atmosphere tense but charged with the promise of clarity. Dr. Patel leaned forward, her pen poised above her notebook. Trisha, she began gently, I'd like to explore what led both of you to feel disconnected. What were your thoughts when Trisha first brought up her desire to go on a date with Brian? I glanced at Trisha, who had a pained expression on her face. I felt blindsided. It seemed like a betrayal, like she was looking for something outside of our marriage without even discussing it with me first. Dr. Patel nodded. And Trisha, how did you perceive Jay's reaction? Trisha took a deep breath, her eyes filling with tears. I didn't expect him to react the way he did. I thought he might be more understanding, but instead, it felt like a complete rejection. I realize now that my request was selfish and hurtful. Dr. Patel turned her attention back to me. Jay, can you see why Trisha might have sought something outside the marriage? I frowned, struggling to process the question. I guess, she was looking for something she felt was missing, but it felt like she was abandoning us instead of trying to work through our issues. Dr. Patel then addressed Trisha. And Trisha, how have you been feeling about your actions and their impact on Jay? Trisha looked at me, her voice breaking. I've been feeling a lot of guilt. I didn't realize how deeply I was hurting Jay until I saw his reaction. I thought I was looking for answers, but now I see that I was just making things worse. After the session, Trisha and I walked out of Dr. Patel's office in a reflective silence. The conversation had been eye-opening, but it was clear that there was still a long road ahead. That evening, as we sat in our living room, the weight of the day's revelations hung between us. I looked at Trisha, who was staring into her lap, her hands clasped tightly together. "Trisha," I began softly, "I've been thinking a lot about what we discussed today." She looked up, her eyes red from the earlier session. "Me too. I didn't realize how much my actions were affecting you." "I know," I said, trying to keep my voice steady. "I've been thinking about my own reactions too. I was so focused on my anger and hurt that I didn't see how lost you were feeling." Trisha nodded, her expression thoughtful. "I guess we were both lost in our own ways. I was looking for something to fill a void, and you were trying to protect yourself from being hurt. We've been so wrapped up in our own pain that we forgot to listen to each other." I sighed, feeling a mix of sadness and hope. "It's going to take time to heal. We need to be patient and really work on understanding each other's needs." Trisha reached out and took my hand. "I want to make this work, Jay. I know it won't be easy, but I'm willing to try. I just hope we can find our way back to where we were before all of this." I squeezed her hand, feeling a glimmer of hope. "I want that too, Trisha. We have a lot to work through, but I'm committed to doing it together." Our journey was far from over, but in that moment, we both felt a renewed sense of commitment. The road ahead would be challenging, but with honest communication and a willingness to confront our issues, there was a chance we could rebuild the trust and connection that had been strained. The days following our insightful counseling session were marked by a renewed sense of purpose. Trisha and I both understood that rebuilding trust would be a slow and deliberate process, requiring patience, commitment, and genuine effort from both of us. We began by setting aside dedicated time each week to discuss our feelings and progress. Our sessions with Dr. Patel continued, but we also made a conscious effort to connect outside of therapy. We started with simple steps, like cooking dinner together and having quiet evenings where we could talk without distractions. One evening, we decided to cook a meal together, a ritual we'd enjoyed early in our marriage but had long neglected. As we worked side by side in the kitchen, the atmosphere was less tense than it had been in recent months. The act of preparing food together became a metaphor for our attempt to rebuild what had been broken. "Pass me the garlic, please," Trisha said, stirring the pot on the stove. Her voice was lighter, but there was an underlying seriousness in her tone. "Here you go," I replied, handing her the garlic. I paused for a moment. "You know, I've been thinking a lot about what we've been through. I'm still hurt, but I'm trying to focus on what we can do to fix things." Trisha looked at me, her eyes softening. "I know. I've been thinking about that too. It's not just about saying the right things, it's about showing that I'm committed to making things better." We continued cooking in companionable silence, the clatter of utensils and the simmering of the sauce filling the room. The simple act of working together helped us reconnect in ways that words alone couldn't. Later that week, during one of our counseling sessions, Dr. Patel addressed our progress. "Jay, Trisha, it's clear that you're both making an effort to reconnect. But rebuilding trust also requires transparency and consistent actions. How are you both managing that aspect?" Trisha looked at me, her face earnest. "I've been trying to be more open with my feelings and to address issues directly rather than letting them fester. I know that trust is built on consistent actions, not just promises." I nodded in agreement. "And I'm working on being more receptive and not jumping to conclusions. It's a process, and I'm trying to be patient." Dr. Patel smiled, encouraging us. "It's important to keep up these efforts. Trust takes time to rebuild, but with honesty and ongoing effort, you can create a stronger foundation." Outside of therapy, we made additional efforts to demonstrate our commitment to each other. We planned weekend getaways, not as grand gestures but as opportunities to spend quality time together. One such weekend, we visited a nearby town, exploring local attractions and simply enjoying each other's company. One evening, as we sat on a bench overlooking a scenic view, Tricia turned to me with a thoughtful expression. "Jay, I've been reflecting on how far we've come. I know it's not perfect, but I feel like we're making real progress." I took her hand, feeling a renewed sense of hope. "I do too. It's been hard, but I can see that we're working through things. I appreciate the effort you're putting in, and I hope we can keep moving forward." Tricia squeezed my hand in return. "I'm committed to this, Jay. I want us to come out stronger on the other side. We're both learning and growing, and that's important." Our journey was far from complete, but the small victories felt significant. The trust that had been fractured was gradually being rebuilt, one step at a time. We were learning to communicate more openly, to be more understanding of each other's needs, and to find joy in the everyday moments we shared. As we continued our efforts, it became clear that rebuilding trust was not just about fixing what had been broken but about creating a new, stronger bond that could withstand future challenges. The path ahead remained uncertain, but with each passing day, we were learning to navigate it together.